With Jonathan Hutton, one of the newest members of the Outkick crew, he, along with Paul Kaharski and Chad Withrow, will have a new show debuting on March 15th as a part of the Outkick universe. I'm excited for that. He has done a lot of work over the last several years in radio. And Hutton, I want to start with this. I basically started off the show this morning talking about how fascinated I am by the drama in Dallas surrounding Dak Prescott. And you've been covering the NFL for a long time. Are you surprised that it seems like we've hit a pivot point in terms of quarterbacks being one sort of universe and every other player in the NFL being a totally different stratosphere? When we talk about, and I'll be talking about this during the show because I'm kind of fascinated by it, but Dak Prescott, Carson Wentz, Russell Wilson yesterday was on Dan Patrick. Obviously, we know about all the drama surrounding Deshaun Watson. It's like Tom Brady suddenly being a free agent has completely removed this idea that you can't go find a guy and immediately win another championship. Are you surprised by all that drama? Do you buy into that being a connection that Brady has basically unleashed this mad pursuit of Super Bowl championships and it's running straight through the quarterback profession, and these guys recognize how much more value they may have had than historically?
Yeah, I mean, again, Clay, good morning. We thought last year's quarterback carousel was crazy. You know, this year is going to be insane. And it's because of what you're talking about, because teams right now they're at a crossroads with some of these quarterbacks. You referenced Russell Wilson. If the Seahawks trade away Russell Wilson, there is a massive cap hit that they're going to take in 2021 with a cap that's already going to be lower than what they played under this year. And with Dak Prescott, the Cowboys missed the window to extend him. They were citing the injury concerns, and now he's coming off another injury if they wanted to extend him again. So he's going to remain unhappy with the money and the length of the contract that they're willing to give him. And Tom Brady wins again because Tom Brady's contract in New England set him up to opt out and to do exactly what he just did, locate a team that was going to build things around his skill set. He had some say in players that joined him in Tampa Bay. The team that he left did not face a huge cap casualty by seeing him leave. I mean, it was just a case of Brady winning that contract negotiation and then setting himself up to do just that, go down and win another Super Bowl, this time in Tampa. The other quarterbacks don't have that leverage. And I know you've referenced this over the years, and I agree with you. If the quarterbacks would come together during the collective bargaining agreement negotiations with the league, that would go a long way, not just for the position, but the entire player holdouts and other things that they would have some leverage on their side. Until the quarterbacks choose to do that, it's going to be the quarterback league, and everyone else just falls into place based on what the big guys do.
It is fascinating because the salary cap, and I've argued this for years, the salary cap is not designed for the best players. Because, take it outside of the world of the NFL, your LeBron Jameses of the world are worth probably $100 million. Now, he may make 40, and you can argue, well, he makes up the rest of that money overall in endorsement income and everywhere off the court. The salary cap benefits the guys at the bottom because it lifts the floor while pulling down the ceiling. And I think there's a tension there because a good quarterback can have a $100 million plus career, and they can last forever, Jonathan. But if you look at the positions otherwise in the NFL, other than kicker and punter, almost nobody really plays at a high level in the NFL past the age of 30 outside of the quarterback position.
Yeah, you're right. And if they do, it's a flash, right? Like it's 2 or 3 years on average. And then the quarterback position, you know, what the teams that play it well are, I think of the Saints. You know, year after year after year, they continue to add to the cap hit that would have been Drew Brees' cap hit. And they continue to build around him by restructuring his contract. And they've reached a point now where they're going into an off season where they're moving on from him. You know, they're going to figure out what they're going to do at that position. But it's not going to be nearly as costly because the rest of the league is going to come down to, you're mentioning that floor, that level that they're going to be having to take a cap hit anyway to lose Drew Brees. It's an interesting planning that goes on with some of these general managers. And there's so much GM and head coaching turnover now that I think a lot of times guys inherit a mess. And by the time they try to actually fiscally figure out a way to get out of it, they're fired too. And that's just the crazy circle that is the National Football League. But I honestly, I prefer the salary cap structure to that of the NBA, where the player has literally all the say. If they don't like their coach, the coach is fired. If they don't like the general manager is fired. I like the set of rules and protocols that the NFL has in place, Clay, because everybody, no matter market size, no matter how much money the owner is willing or not willing to spend, you are in some ways, you are playing by the same set of circumstances and rules. And a lot of times in a lot of leagues, that's just not the case.
And I think that raises an interesting question, because you talked about last season, all the different movement that we saw in the NFL. For a long time in the NFL, I even traced it all the way back to the Herschel Walker trade. Big trades were rare in the NFL. You didn't see Jared Goff getting shipped to Detroit. You didn't see Matthew Stafford getting shipped to the Rams. You didn't see moves like that. You waited on the draft. Occasionally in free agency, big guys would come available, but it almost never happened at the quarterback position. Now it seems like we're in a new era where guys may be moving more frequently. The best thing about the NBA, frankly, a lot of times, is the offseason as opposed to the games themselves. Good or bad to see this much movement for the NFL, for the overall brand of the NFL?
I think it's great because it adds to the off season, if you want to say there is one for the NFL, because the fan frenzy, you can say, actually is heightened whenever the games stop playing. I mean, there are millions of people that tune in to watch the NFL draft or attend an NFL draft in person where the football is not even on display. I mean, the ball that they play with is not even present, and people eat it up. And I think it helps build that off-season fantasy frenzy that everyone loves to discuss, and all the rumor mills that swirl this time of year. And look, with all of the trades, I think this is in part due to a lot of general managers that say, if there's not a quarterback or a top 10 talent that's going to be in our area of the first round, let's trade our first round pick and get a quarterback in place and then build around those pieces through free agency and the rest of the NFL draft. They think the second round, third round pick can have the same type of impact that a low first round pick could have. The only thing you're really giving up is the fifth-year option. And the Rams they haven't had a first-round pick since they traded to move up with the Titans and draft Jared Goff. They've gone the opposite route of rookies early in the draft, and they've built around Goff using players that they drafted much later on day 2 and day 3, and then built around him in free agency. Meanwhile, the same teams seem to always be at the top. Jacksonville comes to mind. And Jacksonville is, again, right there at the top of the NFL draft because they've continued to go by that same structure.
If you were the Colts, who would you sign as your quarterback? Presuming we know Phillip Rivers has retired. We know that Jacoby Brissett's a free agent. It doesn't seem like the Colts are radically committed to him in any way. Andrew Luck, there was a lot of rumors. We talked about him on this show. It seems like the Andrew Luck trial bubble has gone back down. Doesn't seem as if he's going to consider coming back. I mean, that's obviously a possibility out there. Would you make the move for Carson Wentz? Would you go into the draft, given the fact that you have a pretty good team already? Where do you look? I mean, is it a crazy idea to think about trading for a guy like Marcus Mariota, who's floating around out there, and I know you know him well? What would you do if you were the Colts?
Well, Mariota's not a bad option because he only played in 2 or 3 games last year for Vegas. And he's only going to be $10 million against your cap, which is high for a backup, but it's extremely low for a starter. So if you're actually going to trade for him and say, okay, let's see if Marcus can come in and compete for the starting job, if you're willing to put him there with Brissett and others, then you bring him in and do that. And then if he wins the starting job, you have a cheap option while, again, you're trying to figure out the future of that position. Wentz is interesting because of the history that teams have had recently of finding veterans. We see it with Tampa Bay at tight end and at wide receiver along with Brady. We have seen it with Tannehill right here in Nashville, where teams go out and find a veteran that another team really didn't want, and they make it work around the new system and the coaching staff. I'm a big fan of the Colts coaching staff. The same ties that Detroit and LA had, Clay, where the general manager was hired from within the Los Angeles Rams staff, goes to Detroit, and then we see a trade made. Philadelphia just hired the offensive coordinator from Indianapolis Colts. So there is a connection there for trade discussions. So that would make some sense. And look, there are still going to be other quarterbacks out there. We started this conversation by mentioning Russell Wilson. I don't think he's traded, but the Colts have a ton of draft capital, and the Seahawks, if they're told to move Russell Wilson because Wilson's unhappy, things get interesting. And then we still need to see what happens with Deshaun Watson in Houston. But I don't think that the Texans turn around and trade Watson to the Colts within their own division.
How do you we're talking to Jonathan Hutton, one of the newest employees at our Outkick. His show will debut on March 15th. Can't wait for that as we continue to build out more and more content. What do you think about Urban Meyer to Jacksonville, and how stunned would you be if they don't go ahead and take Trevor Lawrence number 1 overall?
I'd be shocked if they don't. I mean, to me, you take the Jacksonville job. Well, Meyer's taking the Jacksonville job for 2 reasons. First, he has complete control. And second, he's got the number 1 overall pick to go get his quarterback in a year where Trevor Lawrence is available. A lot of people are thinking that this is not going to work for Meyer in Jacksonville. I'm on the opposite end of it. I don't know where you stand with it, Clay, but to me, Meyer in his past, no matter where he's been, while we can be critical of the teams he's put together, both off the field, on the field they've produced, and I think he's done a great job with his coaching staff. Look at his coaching staff at Ohio State, and look where those coaches are now. Look at his coaches at Florida and the connections that he's had at Utah. I expect his coaching staff to be extremely cohesive, and I don't think he's going in there lackadaisical, not wanting to win. I mean, the guy has won at a high level, and he's going to be able to groom his quarterback with Trevor Lawrence. I know Justin Fields has the Ohio State connections. There is no way you pass on Trevor Lawrence, who has been talked about, I think, more than Andrew Luck was whenever he was drafted in 2012.
I know you covered him for a long time. I want to circle back around on Marcus Mariota. You covered him for a long time with the Titans. The Raiders situation is an intriguing one at the quarterback position because Derek Carr isn't that expensive now. Marcus Mariota came in and played really, really well when Carr went out with an injury. One of the best backup performances we saw all year. He's 100% healthy. He's barely played, as you know, because he got replaced by Tannehill in week 6 or week 7 of the season before in 19. He's still only 27 years old. Do you believe he can be a starter? Is it possible that he could have his own version of a reclamation project like we saw happen with Ryan Tannehill with the Titans? And if so, what teams do you think would make sense for him?
Well, it has to be a team that is going to emphasize the run game. And Vegas is one of those teams with Josh Jacobs that can do that. Because I think that's his best skill set in many ways. He throws a nice deep ball that I don't think he got enough credit for, but he does it down the middle of the field instead of on the outside down the numbers. So if you've got a true number 1 wideout, chances are that guy's going to be underutilized with Marcus Mariota. If you have a number 1 tight end, Marcus Mariota is going to be that guy's trip to a Pro Bowl and be an All-Pro season. So those are some qualities that I think that would feature an offense with Mariota at quarterback that would make sense. I would stick with Carr if I'm Vegas, and I would look to shoot Mariota for a couple of draft picks if available, Clay. And look, there are some quarterback-needy teams. I don't know if a team is going to call Vegas and say Mariota's our starter, what's the asking price? I think more or less they'll call and see if they can't try to build competition or bring him in to start a season, much like we saw in Miami with Ryan Fitzpatrick, and have a rookie playing behind him that eventually is going to be the guy that's going to be the starter and the franchise quarterback. I don't think a team right now views Mariota as their franchise quarterback, but I do think there will be some who will view him as a reclamation project, much like we saw with Tannehill. And could we see something work out like that in Philadelphia, for instance, when they move on from Wentz? There are some teams that make sense, but to me, not as the day one starter and the guy that you point to and say he's our franchise.
We're talking to Jonathan Hutton. What did you think about the reaction of the media when they went to Tampa and they were like, "Oh my God, everybody's not wearing masks everywhere," particularly the Peter Kings of the world surrounding the Super Bowl?
Yeah. I mean, what did you expect? I mean, their team just won the Super Bowl in their hometown, and they're out and about partying. I mean, to me, I see something like that, and I'm thinking, okay, this is expected. I'm not looking to take photographs and automatically post them on Twitter as if they're breaking the law or they have no regard for anything that we've been through. I think that's a reaction of a fan base that is thrilled that their team just won a world championship, and they're wanting to celebrate with fellow fans. And we saw that with the national title with Alabama, and we'll continue to see that in sports as we get back to normal. I for one, felt a sense of normalcy when I saw it. And look, the numbers will tell the story, but the NFL just finished a season during a pandemic where they canceled 0 games. And they held the Super Bowl in Tampa Bay. For the first time, the home team was able to host it. I would expect if the home team won the game that the fans were going to be found somewhere partying and celebrating what was a massive victory.
Here is the stats, by the way, on the NFL, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit in the final segment. The NFL released its final COVID-19 testing. They conducted 959,680 tests over the course of the season. 262 players had confirmed positive between all of that. I don't know how you would have been able to assess back in July and June about the overall test positivity rate, but I think if you had been able to share those numbers, people would have said, my goodness, that's an incredible success for the NFL.
Well, and consider that right after week 4 going into week 5 is when the Titans had their breakout in their facility.
Yep.
And, they had well over 20 individuals test positive, players, coaches, staff members. And you thought, okay, this is one team. What does the rest of the league look like over the next 3.5 months? And for you to rattle off those numbers and for it to be that extremely low, I mean, it's remarkable that the league pulled it off. It really is, especially when you consider what the other leagues have had to gone through with the bubble and what the NFL decided it would not do without a bubble. And to finish everything on time as they set out to do, and they did it with the draft, they did it through free agency, and they do it with the regular season. They shortened their off-season training. They completely did away with their preseason. And as they look back on it, they can say they finished the Super Bowl on time, and they did it legitimately. I mean, think about this, Clay. One of the quarterbacks that was criticized for gathering in, May or June, for gathering his teammates to practice at a park was Tom Brady, where you had media members camped out across the street in bushes trying to get photos of these guys. And he was told to stop, not just by the league, but by the Players Association. He's now at the top of the mountain yet again of the NFL and is the poster boy for everything that the NFL did well during COVID. That's how the season ends, with Brady, who started by working out on his own and with teammates, ends by hoisting the Lombardi Trophy in a season where the NFL pulled everything off and did it really, really well.
Outstanding stuff as always, Jonathan Hutton. We will talk to you again next week. Looking forward to your show debuting on March 15th.
Thank you, Clay. A little over a month away. Cannot wait to get things rolling with Outkick.